Today I'll be reviewing this lens here. This is the 50-400mm f4.5 to 6.3 for the Sony E mount. I'm Richard, welcome to Zappy Productions, and today I'll be reviewing this lens here. Once again, the Tamron 50-400mm f4.5 to 6.3 for the Sony E mount, and currently is mounted on my Sony A1 body itself. Now, this lens here, I will have to honestly say that it's not something I will actually review normally, or even I would say as use normally, because firstly it's a zoom lens. I'm not a particular fan of zoom except for the 2870 f2, and not only that, it is a super tele, and I always say that I sell my 70-200s really quickly away, and I have not much interest in super teles except for the 200mm f2. So for a 400mm lens, I have honestly say very little interest in it. But that said, my distributor, Cles Distribution for Tamron, actually reached out to me to let me review this lens, and so I took it for a nice little run with it. Now, I have to say that the last few days wasn't the best days, so it was raining most of the time, so I didn't really have a chance to utilize this lens for portrait shoots. In fact, I only did it for one shoot itself. I cancelled 3 shoots that were outdoors because it was raining in the morning, and I couldn't really try it at all. I did do some random shots and some say shots of buildings to let you see how the lens looked like and do some sharpness tests, but pretty much I would say that I only use it for one for the shoot. So that's the limitation of being in a tropical country like Singapore. Now, without wasting time, let's talk about this lens. Now, this lens, first here, this is super tele zoom lens. 50-400mm is a long zoom. It is 8x zoom itself, and this lens does extend quite significantly, as you can see here. It doesn't actually slide out or anything, so no worries on that. It does have a nice little lock to prevent any further sliding, especially in the back, and also it's easy to keep that way. Now, this lens have one zoom ring and one focusing ring here. There is no window or anything to see, and then there's 2 little switches here, one for controlling how the vibration control works, and the other one for a custom function. You can set some of the modes here. Now, the lens has one button, which is what is very common in Sony lenses, and you can program this one button itself. This lens is a 67mm lens. It has a 67mm front, I'll say, element itself, and it does come with a hood. Now, this hood is a friction hood. Sadly, Tamron did not give one with those with the button that can, properly lock and unlock the hood itself. So it's a sad thing. They only gave a friction hood with this lens. But on that, the lens weighs 1.2 kg, and it's a weather sealed lens. So overall, very nice build, and pretty much nice to handle. Now, Tamron lenses are made of some sort of plastic, so it feels like it. There are some pros and cons. It's lighter, and it doesn't feel cold to the touch, even in the air-conditioned area, so that's something to note. Overall, I'll say as the lens is a pretty nice lens to handle out in the field. I don't have any complaints when it comes to handling itself. On the Sony A1, it is relatively balanced. I can actually hold it in one hand, shows that, it's not super heavy or super front heavy to start with. And the nice thing is that the zoom is very short. It's like 1/3 of the ring. See, 1/3 of the ring, and it zooms out fully. So you can really zoom this lens ultra quick. That's something. But you'll feel some of this vacuum force inside the lens itself. Now, that's about it for the physical part of things. 1.2 kg lens, 67mm cap, front element, and pretty much a nice lens to handle. So when it comes to IBs, which this lens does have, it calls vibration control for Tamron, and it works pretty nicely. I did manage to shoot at 1/100 of a shutter with 400mm and get a very good keeper rate, almost 100% keeper rate. Though one of the shots were not super tech sharp, but I would say it's usable. Now at 150, I would say as the user rate drops quite a bit. Yes, you still can have maybe more than 50% of the shots that are kind of usable, but they are soft. And at 125, it's totally not possible to shoot with this lens at 400mm with image stabilization or vibration control for Tamron. So that's something to note. Still, it does mean that this lens have a very effective image stabilization of 2 stops, and that's a big deal because 400mm lens used at 1/100 allows you to do a lot of things, especially for static subjects such as buildings, birds, what's not. Okay, that's it for image stabilization. When it comes to autofocus, now I didn't really have much chance to try because it was raining really badly, pretty much I shot some vehicles, buses, cars to just try out how the autofocus works on subjects moving towards you. With the Sony A1, I would say the keeper rate is very good, more than 90+%. In fact, most of the sequence were sharp. So you can just say that this lens, if you are shooting vehicles at least, it is sharp. So I also shot my friend walking towards me for a few shots. It was all sharp too. So the autofocus does catch up pretty nicely with the Sony A1 for subjects moving towards you, at least for vehicles and also for humans at walking pace. So that is it for autofocus. Didn't really have too much chance to try. One of the biggest problem really is because it's f6.3. So even in daylight, because last few days was raining, so it was mainly just cloudy days, I have to jack the ISO up to about ISO 1006 to hit a 1/2000 shutter to, just pair with the f6.3. So, there is limitations, and if I want any faster shutter or if the sky just dulls a bit, I have to go to ISO 3200, ISO 6400. But then the autofocus still worked pretty nicely, so not much complaints about it. Now, last test I'll talk about is my image quality test as usual. Now, in image quality, I shot outdoors, 50mm and 400mm. In fact, let me show you, even before we talk about the sharpness and stuff. See the difference. The 50mm, you can see all the buildings in the center, at the corner, at the left side. And let me show you the zoom in 400mm. It is a huge difference. This is really the beauty of a 8x zoom, a 50 to 400mm. I say it's a big deal. Now, this particular lens I didn't try for my night shots because, well, the aperture is not very quick. It's quite challenging, and recently it's been raining like nuts, so hard to test it for night shots. You will probably need to shoot at really slow shutter with tripods and stuff. So I didn't really have the chance to do night shots with it. But that's it. For the day shots, I would say as for 50mm, it is sharp in the center, sharp at the side. There is some chromatic aberrations at the sides themselves, so you can show you some of these chromatic aberrations here. You can see a little bit of chromatic aberrations. But on general, it is sharp. Now, I have to say first, this is not 70-200, modern 70-200 sharp. So if you compare to the Nikon 70-200 f2.8, that lens is way sharper than this. But for a Sony A1 50MP camera, shot and then zoom in at 100% on my MacBook Pro, it looks perfectly sharp for me. So, I mean, if you have a lower resolution screen with a bigger panel, yeah, it may look slightly soft, because definitely at the pixel level, it is not as sharp as modern 70-200 lenses or modern primes. But for a zoom lens, for my purpose, zooming to 100%, more than sharp enough for at least a 50mm shot. At 400mm, however, I feel that it does lose a bit of sharpness, but still relatively sharp enough for general usage, and a bit of sharpening will make it really good. So just to note, I feel that 400mm was just sharp enough, while 50mm was pretty sharp. That is really how I rate this. I did notice that 400mm there is very little chromatic aberration, if any at all. There was none, at least for the buildings. And then I show you another shot. I shot at Gardens by the Bay with all that small little black lines. 300 plus, I think this was 200 plus or 300 plus millimeters. Also no chromatic aberration. In fact, let me show you some more shots. Shot at the longer range or longer end of this lens. Very little chromatic aberration at all. So I also did some shots in the city. I can show you once again what's the difference between 50mm, 80mm, and 400mm. Really huge difference. I mean, if you are into zooming like crazy, especially if you're doing travel in a country that is known to be very bright and sunny most of the time, I think this is a great lens, really. 8x zoom can do miracles in such a situation. You can really go and snipe people, snipe buildings, snipe stuff, you do all these close-ups without actually, I would say, as intruding in people's personal space. So it's a nice touch, really. 400mm, 50-400 especially, is a very nice lens to use if you're okay with the aperture itself, which is 4.5 to 6.3. Now, the last thing, of course, I did portraits with it. I show you some portrait shots. Now, I'll say as the portrait-wise, it looks okay. I mean, it's a 400mm lens, 50 to 400. So I shot at 200 plus, 300 plus, and 400 millimeters. I think it looks pretty nice. Now at 400 millimeters, if the subject and the background has some distance, there is separation even at f6.3, but I'll say the bokeh is definitely nothing to be excited about. I mean, it looks like bokeh, but not like super smooth or super, I'll say, pastel-y looking. It still looks decent, but nothing mind-blowing. But then again, I don't think this lens was designed for portraits. So these portrait shots were just to let you know how the bokeh looks like and does it work for humans. And on human, it's sharp enough. At least I zoom in on the eyelashes, you can still count the lashes. Yes, it's not the sharpest in the world, but definitely more than usable. But that said, overall I think this lens is a great lens if you are looking to travel, as I say again, in a sunny location. If you're traveling in a sunny location, 50 to 400mm can do miracles. I mean, if you're going to a city known to be sunny 90% of the time, I will actually get this lens because 50 to 400 is a huge thing, as I showed again. 50 to 400 is a huge range, and really you will admire the difference between both ends. Something magical, if you ask me, to use this lens. And the sharpness is really more than sharp enough for general purpose usage. And if you're not using a 50 megapixel sensor, I mean, most of you may be using A7 III, A7 IV, or maybe even the A7R3 series, which is less megapixel than this. R4, yes, more megapixel, but R3 lesser. There are many other Sony cameras which has less megapixel than this, and we'll probably see less softness because it's really about pixel density in that case. On my MacBook screen at 100%, the A1 looks perfectly sharp with this lens. So I don't think there's an issue. 50 megapixel looks perfectly sharp for me. Now, how much does this cost? The Singapore price I'll put on the screen here, provided to me by my distributor, and for the US price is $1,209 USD, also on the screen here. So it is not a super expensive lens, but I will hardly say it's a budget lens. But for 8x zoom, one lens to do it all with weather sealing, very easy to zoom, very easy to carry around. I think it's something to consider really for purpose of traveling in an area where changing lens is not convenient, and you really want the super zoom. And most importantly, the area must be sunny. Because, as I say again, in Singapore, during cloudy times, f6.3 will require you ISO 1006 or ISO 3002 easily in a cloudy day if you want to have a 1/1000 shutter so that you can shoot moving subjects. So something to note, you really need the shutter speed, you really need the sunlight, you need the exposure to really get sharp shots at 400mm. Even though you can desperately use IS and then shoot at 1/100. But still, if you have a sunny day, this will be a fantastic lens. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this short little review. I will review some audio gears in the future, a little bit more lenses. But, you know, my review will probably pick up speed again. I've been slacking for the last few weeks, but look out for me more in the future. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this review of this Tamron 50 to 400mm f4.5 to 6.3 8x zoom lens. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.